He had a reckless one-night stand with the most hated woman in town and never expected to fall madly in love. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome to Mr. Peter Stories. Today is a beautiful day to connect with all of you, my precious family members. I hope everyone is having a blessed day filled with joy and happiness. First, let us begin with a beautiful prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for bringing this wonderful family together. Please bless each and every member watching from different corners of the world. Keep them safe, healthy, and happy. Guide us all on this beautiful journey of storytelling and sharing. Bless our time together today. Amen. Now, my dear family, I would love to know where each of you is joining from. Are you watching from the United States, home of the beautiful American beauty rose? The United Kingdom, where the Tudor rose blooms proudly? South Africa, where the magnificent King Protea grows? Canada, with its lovely white trillium? Australia, blessed with the golden wattle? The beautiful Caribbean islands, where each nation has its special flower? Jamaica, with the vibrant lignum vitae? Trinidad and Tobago, with the stunning Chaconia? Barbados, with the magnificent pride of Barbados? The Bahamas, with its lovely yellow elder? Dominica, with the Bois Quaib? St. Lucia, with the rose and marguerite? Grenada, with the bougainvillea? Or perhaps another beautiful country? Please drop a comment below to let us know where you're watching from. I want to hear from each one of you, whether you're in a busy city or peaceful countryside, by the ocean or in the mountains. And my dear family, I would love to know your thoughts about our last two stories. Did they touch your hearts? Which parts made you smile? Your feedback means the world to me and helps me create better stories for all of you. Let's take attendance today. Please comment present below so I know you're here with us on this beautiful day. Remember, each one of you makes this family special and complete. Your presence brings joy to our storytelling community. With lots of love and blessings, Mr. Peter, please share your thoughts in the comments below. The autumn wind whispered through the cemetery's ancient oak trees, scattering golden leaves across polished granite headstones. Marama Helene stood motionless before the fresh grave, her black veil rippling like dark water in the breeze. Just 21 days ago, she had been a blushing bride. Now, at 28, she was already a widow. The funeral service had ended hours ago, but she couldn't bring herself to leave. The other mourners had long since departed for the Kingston mansion, where expensive whiskey would fuel even more expensive accusations. Only the gravediggers remained, waiting respectfully in the distance for the young widow to say her final goodbye. "Mrs. Kingston?" The soft voice belonged to Father Michael, the parish priest who had married them just 3 weeks ago. The same hands that had blessed their union now held a silver rosary. "I'm not sure I'm still Mrs. Kingston," Marama replied, her voice hollow. "They're already trying to erase me." The priest's weathered face creased with concern. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, my child. James loved you deeply." "Did he?" Marama's fingers traced the cold marble of the temporary marker. "We had so little time to discover what we truly meant to each other. 3 weeks of marriage, Father. 3 weeks of pure happiness before—" Her voice trailed off as she remembered that morning. James had seemed fine at breakfast, laughing about plans for their delayed honeymoon. He'd kissed her goodbye, promised to be home early. 2 hours later, his secretary had called. Heart attack. No warning, no goodbye, no chance. The first whispers had started at the hospital. She'd heard them through her haze of grief, the nurses exchanging glances, the doctor's carefully neutral tone as he explained about underlying conditions. By the time James's body had been moved to the funeral home, his family's suspicions had crystallized into something darker. "It's not natural," Margaret Kingston had declared, her perfectly manicured hands clutching her pearls. My son was healthy as a horse, 35 years old, and suddenly his heart stops? 3 weeks after marrying her? The emphasis on her had carved deep into Marama's soul. She wasn't from their world of old money and older prejudices. James had met her at the community center where she taught art to underprivileged children. He'd been there to make a donation, part of his family's carefully cultivated public image. One conversation had led to coffee, then dinner, then a whirlwind romance that had scandalized Kingston society. "You'll regret this," Campbell Cash Sr., James's imposing father, had warned at the rehearsal dinner. "Our kind doesn't mix with artists." The way he'd said artists made it clear he meant something far less polite. The memory dissolved as another gust of wind brought the first drops of rain. Marama pulled her coat tighter, but made no move to leave. The growing storm matched her mood, dark, turbulent, threatening to break at any moment. "I should have known," a voice carried across the cemetery. "Look at her, standing there like she actually cared about him." Marama didn't need to turn to know it was Isabella Kingston, James's younger sister. The clicking of expensive heels on wet granite grew closer. "Haven't you done enough?" Isabella's voice dripped with venom. "Or are you waiting to make sure he's really dead?" "Isabella." Father Michael's tone held warning. "This is a place of peace." "Peace?" Isabella laughed bitterly. "There won't be peace until she pays for what she did to my brother." Marama finally turned, letting her veil fall back. "I loved your brother, Isabella, more than you'll ever understand." Love. Isabella's perfect makeup couldn't hide her rage. "You loved his money, his name, his position. 3 weeks of marriage and suddenly he's dead? Don't think we don't see right through you." Thunder rumbled overhead as Marama stepped forward. "I know you're hurting. I'm hurting too, but these accusations—" "Save it for the police," Isabella snapped. "Daddy's already talking to them. They'll investigate everything, your background, your finances, your so-called relationship with James. The truth will come out." Father Michael moved between them. "Miss Kingston, please, this isn't the time or place." "It's exactly the time and place," Isabella replied. "My brother is in the ground because of her, and she has the audacity to stand here pretending to mourn." The rain began falling harder now, but neither woman moved. They stood like statues, grief and anger crackling between them like the lightning that illuminated the sky. "I didn't kill James," Marama said softly. "But you've already decided I did, haven't you? All of you. You never accepted our marriage, and now you'll use his death to destroy me." "You destroyed yourself the moment you set your sights on my brother," Isabella hissed. "Did you think we wouldn't figure it out? That we'd just accept you into our family? You're nothing but a gold-digging murderer, and I promise you, you'll pay for what you did." With that, Isabella turned and stalked away, her heels clicking a staccato rhythm of hate across the wet stones. Father Michael touched Marama's arm gently. "Don't let her words poison your heart," he said. "Grief makes people say terrible things." "This isn't grief," Marama replied, watching Isabella's retreating form. "This is just the beginning." She was right. By nightfall, the whispers had become shouts. The local news ran a story about James's suspicious death. Photos of Marama appeared, at the wedding, at the funeral, leaving the police station after initial questioning. The narrative was already being written, and she had no power to change it. Back in her small apartment, she couldn't bear to stay in the Kingston mansion. Marama sat in darkness, watching rain stream down her windows. The television droned in the background, another news report about James's death. "Sources close to the Kingston family suggest foul play," the reporter intoned. While police have made no official statements, questions are being raised about the sudden death of James Kingston just weeks after his controversial marriage to local art teacher Marama Helene. Controversial, the word barely scratched the surface of what their relationship had been. James had fought his family for her, stood up to their prejudices and threats. He'd believed in their love, in the future they'd planned together. Now that future lay shattered, like the framed wedding photo Marama held in trembling hands. They'd looked so happy, so in love. James's smile had been radiant as he dipped her for their first dance, whispering promises of forever in her ear. Forever had lasted exactly 21 days. A knock at her door made her jump. Her heart raced as she approached, expecting police or reporters or more angry Kingstons. Instead, she found her neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, holding a casserole dish. "I thought you might need some food," the older woman said kindly, "and company if you want it." Marama felt tears well up, the first she'd allowed herself since the funeral. "They think I killed him," she whispered. "Everyone thinks I killed him." Mrs. Rodriguez set the dish down and pulled Marama into a fierce hug. "Not everyone, mi hija, not everyone." But as the days would prove, almost everyone did. The Kingston family's influence ran deep in their town. Doors closed in Marama's face. Former friends crossed the street to avoid her. The community center where she taught asked her to take a leave of absence. The investigation dragged on, fueled by the family's insistence and their considerable resources. Every aspect of Marama's life was scrutinized, every relationship questioned, every financial transaction examined. Though no evidence of wrongdoing was found, the damage to her reputation was irreparable. 1 month after James's death, Marama stood once again at his grave. The temporary marker had been replaced by an elaborate headstone, the Kingston family name prominently displayed. Her own name was conspicuously absent, though she was still legally his widow. "I'll survive this," she promised the silent stone. "Whatever they do to me, however they try to break me, I'll survive." She didn't know then how prophetic those words would prove, or that salvation would come in the form of a stormy night and a stranded stranger. She couldn't have imagined that love would find her again, bringing with it both healing and heartbreak. For now, she was alone with her grief and her determination, a widow at 28, accused of a crime she didn't commit, facing a future that seemed as dark as the clouds gathering overhead. Thunder rolled across the heavens as Marama left the cemetery for the last time. She wouldn't return until years later, when the truth had finally come to light and she had found a love that defied all expectations. But that was still to come. For now, she walked alone through the gathering storm, her black dress a moving shadow against the darkening sky, while behind her James Kingston's grave kept its secrets. And ahead, fate was weaving the threads that would lead her to redemption. The rain began to fall, washing away her footprints but not her determination. She would survive this, she would prove them wrong. And somewhere in the future, love waited to heal her shattered dreams. Chapter 2. The Accusation. The marble halls of the courthouse echoed with whispers as Marama Helene walked through the security checkpoint. 2 months had passed since James's death, and the Kingston family had finally made their move. Today wasn't a trial, not yet, but a preliminary hearing that would determine if there was enough evidence to proceed with their accusations. Detective Marcus Rivera watched the young widow pass through the metal detector, noting how she held herself with quiet dignity despite the circumstances. He'd spent weeks investigating James Kingston's death, pressured by the family's influence and their army of private investigators. But something about this case didn't sit right with him. "Mrs. Kingston," he called out softly, catching up to her near the water fountain. "A moment?" Marama turned, her face carefully composed. She'd learned to wear a mask in public, to hide the pain that threatened to overwhelm her at any moment. "Detective, have you found more evidence against me?" "Actually," he glanced around before continuing, "I wanted you to know that my official report shows no indication of foul play. The medical examiner confirmed it was a natural death, an undiagnosed heart condition." Hope flickered in Marama's eyes, but died quickly. "It won't matter. They'll find a way to twist it." "Mrs. Kingston, please," she interrupted. "Just Marama. They've made it clear I'm not worthy of the Kingston name." Before Detective Rivera could respond, a commotion at the courthouse entrance drew their attention. Campbell Cash Sr. had arrived, flanked by his legal team and family members. James's father cut an imposing figure in his tailored suit, his silver hair and stern features giving him the appearance of an avenging angel. "There she is," he announced, voice carrying across the marble floor, "the woman who murdered my son." Marama felt the detective stiffen beside her. "Mr. Cash," he said firmly, "those accusations are unfounded." "Are they?" Campbell Sr. approached, each step measured and deliberate. 3 weeks of marriage, 3 weeks before my son's mysterious death, and now she stands to inherit millions. You don't find that suspicious, Detective? "The medical evidence can be manipulated," Campbell Sr. cut in, "just like she manipulated my son." Marama found her voice. "I loved James. I never wanted his money." "Love?" Campbell Sr. laughed coldly. "What would someone like you know about love? You seduced my son with your pretty face and sob stories about helping underprivileged children, made him think you were different from the other gold diggers. But I saw through you from the start." The courthouse had gone silent, spectators gathering to watch the confrontation. Among them, Marama spotted familiar faces, former friends who now looked at her with suspicion or outright hatred. "Mr. Cash," Detective Rivera stepped forward, "this isn't the place. This is exactly the place," Campbell Sr. thundered. "This is where justice will be served. This is where the truth about James's death will finally come out." And as if on cue, the heavy doors of courtroom 3 swung open. The bailiff emerged, calling their case number. Marama felt her legs go weak, but forced herself to stand straight. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Inside the courtroom, the Kingston family's influence was immediately apparent. Their side of the gallery was packed with supporters, business associates, social elite, even local politicians. Marama's side held only her lawyer, Mrs. Rodriguez, and surprisingly, Detective Rivera. Judge Eleanor Maxwell studied the assembled crowd over her reading glasses. In her 30 years on the bench, she'd seen her share of wealthy families trying to use the court system for revenge. But the Kingstons were different. Their power reached into every corner of the city. "Your Honor," Campbell Sr.'s lawyer began, "we're here today because a young man's life was cut tragically short under suspicious circumstances. James Kingston was healthy, successful, with everything to live for. Then he married the defendant, and 3 weeks later, he was dead." Marama's lawyer, David Chen, stood. "Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is making inflammatory statements without evidence." "We have evidence," Campbell Sr.'s lawyer smiled. "Medical experts who will testify that Mr. Kingston's supposed heart condition could have been induced artificially. Financial records showing unusual activity in the defendant's bank account just days before the death. And witnesses who will speak to the defendant's character and motives." Judge Maxwell peered at the stack of documents being presented. "Mr. Chen, Your Honor, this is a fishing expedition," David argued. "The police investigation found no evidence of foul play. The medical examiner's report clearly states—" "The medical examiner can be wrong," Campbell Sr. interrupted from his seat. "My son was murdered, and that woman is responsible." The accusation rang through the courtroom like a gunshot. Marama felt every eye turn to her, judging, condemning. She thought of James, of their last morning together, of his smile as he kissed her goodbye. How had their love story turned into this nightmare? "Mr. Cash," Judge Maxwell warned, "outbursts will not be tolerated in my courtroom." But the damage was done. The whispers had already started, spreading through the gallery like poison. Marama could hear fragments of conversations, always seemed suspicious. Married him so quickly, never fit in with their crowd. The hearing continued for hours. Campbell Senior's lawyers presented their evidence, circumstantial connections and twisted facts that painted Marama as a calculating gold digger. They brought forward character witnesses who spoke of her suspicious behavior at social events, her inappropriate relationship with James before their marriage, her questionable background. David fought back skillfully, but Marama could see the uphill battle they faced. The Kingston family's influence cast a long shadow over the proceedings. Even Judge Maxwell, known for her impartiality, seemed affected by the weight of their accusations. "Your Honor," Campbell Senior's lawyer concluded, "we ask that you grant our petition for a full investigation into James Kingston's death. The evidence clearly suggests—" "Evidence?" Detective Rivera stood suddenly from his seat in the gallery. "Your Honor, as the lead investigator on this case, I must object. There is no evidence of foul play." Judge Maxwell raised an eyebrow. "Detective, you're not a party to these proceedings." "No, ma'am, but I am an officer of the law. And what's happening here isn't justice. It's persecution." Campbell Sr. rose, face flushed with anger. "How dare you? My son is dead." "Yes, he is," Rivera replied calmly, "and I grieve for your loss. But Mrs. Kingston is not responsible. The medical evidence is clear. Your son died of natural causes, the same condition that killed his grandfather." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Few people knew about the Kingston family's history of heart problems. It was a carefully guarded secret that might tarnish their perfect image. "That's confidential medical information," Campbell Senior's lawyer protested. "It's relevant medical history," David Chen countered. "Information that supports what we've been saying all along. James's death, while tragic, was not murder." Judge Maxwell held up her hand for silence. "I've heard enough for today. I'll review the submitted materials and make my decision about proceeding with a full investigation." As the courtroom began to empty, Isabella Kingston approached Marama. "You may have fooled them," she hissed, "but we know what you did, and we'll never stop until you pay for it." Marama met her gaze steadily. "I didn't kill your brother, Isabella. I loved him, and somewhere deep down, you know that's true." "The only thing I know," Isabella replied, "is that you're going to lose everything. We'll make sure of it." Later that evening, Marama sat in her apartment, watching rain streak down her windows. The day's events played through her mind like a nightmare she couldn't wake from. Her phone buzzed. Another message from a former friend, this time telling her to rot in hell. A knock at her door made her freeze. These days, unexpected visitors usually meant more accusations or threats. But when she checked the peephole, she saw Detective Rivera. "I'm sorry to disturb you," he said when she opened the door, "but there's something you should know." He handed her a file, medical records, bank statements, witness interviews. "The Kingston family is powerful," he explained, "but they're not above the law. Keep these safe. If they push for a trial, this evidence will help prove your innocence." Marama took the file with trembling hands. "Why are you helping me?" Rivera's expression softened. "Because I've seen too many powerful families destroy innocent lives. What they're doing to you, it's not right." After he left, Marama read through the documents. Each page confirmed what she'd known all along. James's death had been a tragic accident, not murder. But would the truth be enough against the Kingston family's influence and determination to destroy her? She walked to her bedroom window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. The city lights blurred through her tears, creating halos in the darkness. Somewhere out there, the Kingstons were plotting their next move, gathering more ammunition for their campaign of destruction. But Marama had survived worse than their accusations. She'd grown up fighting for everything she had, and she wouldn't let them break her now. James had loved her for her strength, her determination, her refusal to back down from what she believed in. Thunder rumbled in the distance, heralding another storm. Marama thought of James, of their brief time together, of the love they'd shared that his family couldn't understand. She would fight their accusations, protect his memory, and prove that their love had been real. What she didn't know, couldn't know, was that fate had other plans. On another stormy night, not far in the future, a different man would seek shelter at her door, and with him would come a chance at love again, though that love would bring its own storms to weather. For now, she stood alone in her darkened apartment, surrounded by evidence of her innocence that might never matter to those determined to believe her guilty. Outside, the city continued its relentless pace, indifferent to the drama unfolding in its midst. The accusations had been made, the battle lines drawn. Marama Helene, widow and accused, faced a future uncertain as the gathering storm. But in her heart, she held on to one truth that no one could take away. She had loved James Kingston truly, deeply, completely. And somewhere in the darkness, destiny was already weaving the threads that would lead her to a different kind of love, one that would defy all accusations and prove that sometimes the heart's greatest victories come after its deepest wounds. The storm broke over the city, rain washing away the day's pain, but not its memory. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new accusations, new wounds to heal. But for tonight, Marama let herself remember James's love, let it strengthen her for the fights ahead. She didn't know it yet, but this was just the beginning of her story. The accusations that threatened to destroy her would ultimately lead her to a love more powerful than anything she could imagine. But that was still to come. For now, she stood vigil in her lonely apartment, while outside, the storm raged on. And somewhere in the city, a man named Campbell Cash lived his life, unaware that destiny was already drawing them together. Chapter 3. Stormy Night. Lightning split the sky as Campbell Cash cursed his luck. His Rolls-Royce Phantom, usually the epitome of reliability, had chosen this moment, in the middle of the worst storm of the year, to betray him. The engine sputtered once more before dying completely, leaving him stranded on a winding road lined with ancient oaks and forgotten mansions. "Harrison," he barked into his phone, "where exactly am I?" The static-filled response from his driver did nothing to improve his mood. "What do you mean you can't access my location? I pay enough for this security system to track me on the moon." Another crack of lightning illuminated the road ahead, revealing an iron gate partially hidden by overgrown vegetation. Beyond it, barely visible through the curtain of rain, stood a Victorian mansion. A single light burned in an upstairs window, a beacon in the gathering darkness. Campbell squinted through the windshield, trying to make out any identifying markers. The gate's elaborate metalwork spelled out a name he knew too well. Kingston. Of all the places, he muttered, remembering the headlines from months ago. This was the infamous Kingston estate, where the scandal of James Kingston's death and his widow's alleged involvement had captivated the city's elite. Campbell had avoided the drama, too focused on his own empire-building to concern himself with society gossip. Thunder shook the car as he weighed his options. His phone showed no signal, the storm was worsening, and the nearest town was miles away. That lit window offered his only hope for shelter. Grabbing his briefcase and luxury umbrella, which immediately turned inside out in the wind, Campbell made his way to the gate. It creaked open at his touch, years of neglect evident in its rusty hinges. The gravel driveway crunched under his Italian leather shoes, now thoroughly ruined by the rain. The mansion loomed closer, its Victorian architecture both elegant and forbidding in the storm's wild light. Paint peeled from the wooden trim, and several shutters hung askew, telling a story of faded grandeur, yet that single light burned steady and warm, drawing him forward like a moth to flame. Campbell mounted the steps to the wraparound porch, his soaked suit clinging uncomfortably to his athletic frame. Up close, he could see signs of recent care: swept floors, trimmed plants near the door, fresh paint on the railing. Someone was maintaining at least this part of the property. He raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. The infamous Mrs. Kingston might be behind this door. The woman his social circle had condemned as a gold-digging murderer. The rational part of his brain suggested finding shelter elsewhere. But another crack of lightning made the decision for him. His knock echoed through the house. For a long moment, only the storm answered. Then soft footsteps approached from within. The porch light flickered on, and Campbell found himself straightening his tie, a habitual gesture before any important meeting. The door opened a crack, secured by a heavy chain. In the narrow gap, he caught a glimpse of dark eyes and caramel skin. "Who are you?" a woman's voice demanded, wariness evident in every syllable. "Campbell Cash," he replied, letting his name carry its usual weight. "My car broke down. I just need to use a phone." The eyes studied him intently. "The Campbell Cash? Of Cash Industries?" "The same. And you must be Mrs. Kingston." The door closed abruptly. Campbell heard the chain sliding. Then it reopened fully, revealing a woman who looked nothing like the society paper's portrayal. Where they had painted a calculating seductress, he saw someone young, beautiful, yes, but with a quiet dignity that surprised him. Marama Helene, he remembered her full name now, wore simple jeans and an oversized sweater, her black hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders. No makeup, no jewelry, none of the trappings he'd expected from a woman accused of marrying for money. "You're drenched," she observed, her voice softer now. "Come in before you catch your death." The phrase made her flinch slightly, and Campbell remembered her husband had died suddenly, leading to all those accusations. He stepped into the foyer, noting how she maintained a careful distance. "The phone is in the kitchen," she said, leading the way, "though I doubt any signals are getting through in this storm." Campbell followed, taking in his surroundings. The interior was as well maintained as the porch, though sparsely furnished. No signs of the luxury he'd expected from a Kingston residence. The kitchen, when they reached it, was warm and inviting, with the scent of recent cooking in the air. "You live here alone?" he asked. Then immediately regretted the question when he saw her stiffen. "Yes," she replied shortly. "The Kingston family made it clear I wasn't welcome in their mansion after James died." She gestured to an old-fashioned telephone on the wall. "You can try calling, but the lines have been spotty all evening." As if to emphasize her point, another thunderclap rattled the windows. The kitchen lights flickered ominously. "We should probably move away from the windows," Marama suggested. "The storm's getting worse." They relocated to what had once been a formal parlor, now converted into a cozy living room. A fire burned low in the hearth, casting warm light across worn but comfortable furniture. Campbell noticed an easel in the corner, a half-finished painting visible beneath a protective cloth. "You're an artist?" he asked, genuinely curious. Marama's expression softened slightly. "I teach art at the community center. Or I did, before everything happened." She busied herself adding wood to the fire. "They asked me to take a leave of absence when the accusations started." Campbell watched her work, noting the grace in her movements, the quiet strength in her bearing. This wasn't the calculating social climber he'd heard whispered about at charity galas and board meetings. This was someone else entirely. "Why did you let me in?" he asked suddenly. "You must know who I am, what circles I move in. For all you know, I could be here to gather more evidence against you." Marama straightened, meeting his gaze directly. Mr. Cash, when you've been accused of murder, you learn quickly who your real friends are. I have nothing left to lose and nothing to hide. Besides, she added with a hint of dark humor, if I were the killer they claim, would I really risk taking in another wealthy man on a dark and stormy night? The absurdity of the situation struck them both at the same moment, and unexpected laughter filled the room. Campbell found himself drawn to the way her entire face transformed when she smiled, years of worry falling away to reveal a natural beauty that no society makeup could enhance. A particularly violent gust of wind howled through the eaves, making Marama jump. Without thinking, Campbell stepped closer, offering the instinctive protection of his presence. She didn't move away. "The storms," she said quietly, "they remind me of the night James died." It was raining then, too. Campbell struggled with an unfamiliar urge to comfort her. "I'm sorry. I didn't know him well, but losing someone so suddenly—" "Do you believe I killed him?" she asked abruptly, turning to face him. Their proximity was suddenly electric, charged with something neither of them had expected to find on this stormy night. "I don't know you," Campbell replied honestly. "But no, looking at you now, I don't believe you killed anyone." Marama's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "You'd be the first person from your world to say that." Another thunderclap shook the house, and the lights went out completely. In the darkness, Campbell felt Marama's hand grasp his arm, an instinctive reaction to the sudden blackness. The fire provided the only illumination now, casting dancing shadows across their faces. "I should check the fuse box," Marama said, but made no move to release his arm. "It's probably the storm," Campbell replied, equally reluctant to break their connection. In the firelight, with her face tilted up to his, he could see why James Kingston had defied his family to marry her. There was something utterly authentic about her, a quality rare in his world of practiced smiles and calculated marriages. The wind howled louder, rain lashing against the windows like nature's own accusation. But in that moment, in the warm circle of firelight, Campbell Cash, billionaire CEO, notorious deal-maker, man who trusted no one, felt something crack in his carefully constructed armor. "Tell me," he said softly, "tell me what really happened that night." And so she did. As the storm raged outside, Marama told him about James, about their whirlwind romance, about the 3 weeks of perfect happiness before tragedy struck. She spoke of the accusations, the betrayals, the lonely months of fighting to preserve not just her freedom, but her very identity. Campbell listened, really listened, something he hadn't done in years. He heard not just her words, but the pain beneath them, the strength it took to survive when the world had already decided your guilt. Without realizing it, he'd moved closer, drawn by the honest emotion in her voice. "I loved him," she concluded simply. "Not his money, not his name, just him. And now I'll spend the rest of my life being punished for that love." The fire had burned low, casting more shadows than light now. In the darkness, Campbell found himself reaching for her hand. "Not if I can help it," he said, surprising himself with the fierce protectiveness in his voice. Marama looked up at him, startled by his tone. Their eyes met in the firelight, and something electric passed between them, something neither had expected to find on this stormy night. The moment stretched, charged with possibility. Then another crack of thunder made Marama jump, accidentally stepping closer to Campbell. His arms went around her automatically, offering comfort and finding something else entirely. Time seemed to stop. The storm faded to background noise as they stood there, two strangers connected by circumstance and something deeper neither dared name. Campbell could feel her heart racing, matching the rapid beat of his own. "We shouldn't," Marama whispered, but made no move to pull away. "No," Campbell agreed, even as his hand moved to cup her cheek. We really shouldn't. The fire crackled, throwing sparks up the chimney. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the old mansion. But inside, in that circle of warmth and understanding, something new was brewing, something that would change both their lives forever. Neither moved for a long moment, caught in the gravity of what this night might mean. Then, slowly, inevitably, Campbell lowered his head as Marama tilted her face up to his. Their lips met in a kiss that tasted of rain and possibilities, of comfort sought and something more profound found. The power chose that moment to return, flooding the room with sudden light. They broke apart, both breathing heavily, both aware that something irreversible had just occurred. "I should go," Campbell said, though every fiber of his being argued against it. "Yes," Marama agreed, stepping back. "You should." But neither moved. The storm still raged, the night was still young, and in that moment, standing in a forgotten mansion with a woman he'd just met, Campbell Cash felt more alive than he had in years. What happened next would change everything, for both of them. But that was still to come. For now, they stood in the warm light, two souls who had found each other on a stormy night, unaware that fate had much bigger plans in store. Outside, the wind howled its secrets to the darkness, while inside, a new story was just beginning to unfold. Chapter 4. Unexpected Shelter. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight, its deep chimes echoing through the old mansion. Marama stood at the living room window, watching rain cascade down the glass, while behind her, Campbell Cash added another log to the dying fire. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and they both knew he wouldn't be leaving anytime soon. "Your security team must be worried," she said, trying to maintain some semblance of propriety, despite the electricity still crackling between them from that unexpected kiss. "They're used to me disappearing," Campbell replied, his voice carrying that hint of roughness that made her pulse quicken, though I doubt they'd expect to find me here, of all places. Marama turned from the window, studying him in the firelight. He'd removed his wet suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves, revealing powerful forearms tanned from days spent on his yacht. The casual display of strength should have made her nervous. She'd grown wary of powerful men since James's death, but something about Campbell put her at ease. "Why did you really let me in?" he asked, echoing his earlier question. "The truth this time." Marama considered her answer carefully. "Because when I looked through that peephole, I saw something familiar in your eyes. Loneliness, maybe, or understanding." Campbell moved closer, his expensive shoes silent on the old hardwood floors. "And what do you see now?" "Danger," she whispered, but didn't step back when he reached her. "The kind that could destroy what's left of my life." His hand rose to cup her cheek, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "Or save it." The kiss this time was different. Not the sudden, passion-filled moment from before, but something slower, deeper, more deliberate. Marama felt herself melting into it, into him, all her carefully constructed walls crumbling under the gentle assault of his lips. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, the storm outside seemed to match the tumult in their hearts. Lightning illuminated the room in stark flashes, casting dramatic shadows across their entwined figures. "Tell me about your world," Marama said, leading him to the worn but comfortable sofa. "The real one, not what appears in the society pages." Campbell's laugh held a touch of bitterness. "My world? It's all smoke and mirrors, Marama. Business deals made over $100 scotch, marriages arranged for mutual benefit, friendships that last only as long as the latest merger." "Sounds lonely." "It is." He studied her face in the firelight. "But you know all about loneliness, don't you?" Marama nodded, drawing her knees up to her chest. "Since James died, I've learned every shade of it. The loneliness of empty rooms, of unanswered calls, of former friends crossing the street to avoid me. But the worst kind? She met his gaze steadily. The loneliness of being surrounded by people who've already decided your guilt. Campbell's hand found hers, fingers intertwining naturally. I've been watching you these past months, you know. At charity events, board meetings, always on the periphery, head held high despite the whispers. You noticed me. The surprise in her voice made his heart ache. How could I not? You have a dignity they can't touch, a strength that makes their accusations look petty. His free hand traced the curve of her cheek. I should have approached you sooner. Why didn't you? Fear, maybe. Not of their gossip, but of what I saw in you. Something real in a world built on facades. Thunder crashed overhead, making the old house creak and groan. Marama shifted closer to Campbell instinctively, and his arm went around her shoulders as if it belonged there. We're playing with fire, she murmured against his chest. I know. His fingers tangled in her hair, tilting her face up to his. But for the first time in years, I feel alive. Their lips met again, and this time there was no holding back. The kiss deepened, became hungry, desperate. Marama's hands slid up his chest as Campbell pulled her closer, both lost in the unexpected perfection of their connection. When they finally broke apart, Marama's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I can't do this, she whispered. I can't risk my heart again. The accusations, the judgment. It would be worse this time. Campbell brushed her tears away with gentle fingers. Why worse? Because you're even wealthier than James was. They already think I'm a gold digger who killed her husband if they found out about this. She gestured between them. They'd say I was moving on to my next victim. The bitterness in her voice made Campbell's heart clench. He wanted to protect her, to shield her from the cruel world that had already taken so much from her, but he also understood her fears. What if I don't care what they think? He said softly. Marama smiled sadly. You say that now, in the dark, in the storm. But tomorrow, in the harsh light of day, your board members, your business partners, they'd all whisper the same warnings. She killed her husband. Be careful. You might be next. The words hung between them, heavy with possibility and pain. Campbell wanted to argue, to tell her none of that mattered, but they both knew better. In their world, perception was reality. Still, he couldn't bring himself to let her go. Something about this woman, this night, had awakened feelings he'd thought long buried under years of cynical deal-making. Dance with me, he said suddenly. Marama blinked. What? Dance with me. He stood, pulling her gently to her feet. No music, no witnesses, no judgments. Just us. You're crazy, she laughed, but didn't resist when he pulled her into his arms. They swayed together in the firelight, the storm providing their rhythm. Marama's head found its perfect resting place on Campbell's shoulder while his cheek pressed against her hair. For a moment, they could pretend the outside world didn't exist. I never danced with James like this, Marama said softly. Our dances were always public, performed for his family's approval. This feels different. Campbell's arms tightened around her. Everything about tonight feels different. They moved together in comfortable silence, letting the crackling fire and falling rain create their private symphony. In that moment, both felt the weight of their separate worlds lifting, replaced by something new and fragile and beautiful. Stay, Marama whispered, surprising herself with the invitation. Not for... just stay. Until the storm passes. Campbell's answer was to pull her closer, one hand sliding up to cup the back of her neck. Their eyes met in the dim light, both understanding that this night would change everything. Are you sure? he asked, giving her one last chance to step back from the precipice they were approaching. Instead of answering, Marama rose on tiptoe and kissed him. This time there was no hesitation, no holding back. They poured all their loneliness, their need, their unexpected connection into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, the storm outside had begun to ease, but neither noticed, too caught up in the storm brewing between them. "I should warn you," Marama said, her fingers tracing patterns on his chest. "Loving me is dangerous. Just ask the Kingston family." Campbell's laugh rumbled through his chest. "Sweetheart, I wrote the book on dangerous, and right now—" His lips found hers again briefly. "Right now, you're the only safe harbor I want." They spent the rest of the night talking, sharing pieces of themselves they'd never shown anyone else. Campbell told her about growing up in his father's shadow, about building his empire from scratch when his family cut him off. Marama shared stories of her childhood dreams of being an artist, of meeting James, of the whirlwind romance that had ended in tragedy. As dawn approached, they found themselves curled together on the sofa. The fire burned down to embers. Marama's head rested on Campbell's chest, his arms wrapped protectively around her. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "Now?" Campbell pressed a kiss to her temple. "Now we face whatever comes together." But they both knew it wouldn't be that simple. The morning would bring back all the complications, all the whispers and accusations. Their worlds would collide in ways neither could predict. For now, though, they had this moment, this connection, this unexpected shelter from their separate storms. And as the first light of dawn began to paint the sky, both silently prayed that what they'd found in the darkness would be strong enough to survive in the light. Little did they know, fate had much bigger plans for them, plans that would test their newfound connection in ways neither could imagine. But that was still to come. For now, they held each other in the quiet of the morning, two souls who had found something rare and precious in the midst of life's storms. And though they couldn't know it yet, this was just the beginning of their story. The grandfather clock struck 6, its chimes echoing through the old house like a promise. Outside, the storm had finally passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and new. Inside, Marama and Campbell remained entwined, neither willing to break the spell of their night together. Tomorrow would bring its own storms, but for now, they had found their unexpected shelter in each other's arms. Chapter 5. Night of Passion. The embers in the fireplace cast a warm glow across the living room as dawn approached. Marama stirred in Campbell's arms, reality slowly seeping back into their cocoon of comfort. They'd talked through the night, sharing secrets and stories, but neither had acted on the electricity crackling between them. "I should go," Campbell murmured, though his arms tightened around her. The storms passed. Marama lifted her head from his chest, meeting his gaze in the dim light. "Yes," she agreed softly. "You should." Neither moved. The grandfather clock ticked away precious seconds as they remained frozen in that moment, both aware they stood on the edge of something life-changing. "Marama," Campbell's voice was rough with emotion. "Tell me to leave. Tell me this is too complicated, too dangerous." Instead of answering, she reached up and traced his jaw with gentle fingers. The simple touch ignited something primal in Campbell. His hand caught hers, bringing her fingers to his lips. "Last chance," he warned, pressing kisses to her fingertips. "Once I start, I won't be able to stop." Marama's response was to rise up and capture his lips with hers. The kiss deepened immediately, months of loneliness and need pouring into their connection. Campbell's hands tangled in her hair as she pressed closer, erasing any remaining space between them. "Wait," he gasped, pulling back slightly. "Are you sure? Your reputation—" "My reputation," Marama laughed bitterly. They already think I'm a black widow. What's one more wealthy man in my web? Campbell framed her face with his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. Don't make light of this. What's happening between us is real. The fierce sincerity in his voice brought tears to her eyes. That's what scares me, she whispered. I can handle their hatred, their accusations, but this, feeling something real again, that terrifies me. Then let me show you there's nothing to fear. Campbell's thumbs brushed away her tears. Let me prove that what we've found here is worth any risk. Their next kiss was slower, deeper, filled with promise. Marama melted into him, all her doubts washing away under the tide of emotion. Campbell awakened in her. His hands skimmed down her sides, leaving trails of fire in their wake. The bedroom, she murmured against his lips. Upstairs. Campbell stood, lifting her effortlessly into his arms. She wrapped her legs around his waist as he carried her toward the grand staircase, their kisses growing more urgent with each step. The master bedroom, like the rest of the house, showed signs of Marama's artistic touch, soft colors, comfortable furnishings, and several of her paintings adorned the walls. But neither noticed the decor as they tumbled onto the bed, too lost in each other to care about their surroundings. You're beautiful, Campbell breathed, watching moonlight play across her skin as he slowly undressed her. So damn beautiful. Marama's hands weren't idle, making quick work of his shirt buttons. You're not so bad yourself, she teased, running her fingers over his muscled chest. Their laughter turned to sighs as skin met skin. Campbell took his time, exploring every inch of her with reverent touches and tender kisses. When he finally joined their bodies, the connection felt like coming home. Later, as false dawn painted the sky in shades of pearl and gold, they lay tangled in sheets and each other. Campbell traced lazy patterns on Marama's bare shoulder while she played with his fingers, both content in their shared silence. "What are you thinking?" he asked finally, pressing a kiss to her temple. "That I should regret this," she replied honestly. "But I don't. Not even a little." Campbell's arms tightened around her. "Good, because this is just the beginning." Marama propped herself up on an elbow, studying his face in the growing light. "Campbell, you know this can't last. Your world, my reputation, it would never work. Watch me make it work." His voice held that commanding tone that had built his empire. "I don't care what anyone thinks. I want you in my life. Even when they warn you about me, when they tell you I'm dangerous. Especially then." He rolled them over, pinning her beneath him. "Let them talk. I know the truth about you now." Marama's hands came up to frame his face. "And what truth is that? That you're the strongest, most genuine person I've ever met." His lips brushed hers softly. "That what happened to James was a tragedy, not a crime. That you deserve to be loved without fear or judgment." Tears spilled down her cheeks as his words touched something deep inside her. Campbell kissed them away, then captured her lips in a kiss that promised everything. Their second joining was slower, more deliberate. They took their time exploring, learning each other's bodies and responses. Every touch, every kiss, carried the weight of growing emotions neither was ready to name. The sun had fully risen by the time they finally dozed off, wrapped in each other's arms. But their peaceful rest was short-lived. A loud knocking from downstairs jolted them awake. Marama sat up, clutching the sheet to her chest. "Who?" "Mrs. Kingston?" a familiar voice called up. "It's Detective Rivera. I have some new information about your case." Campbell was already moving, gathering their scattered clothes. "Back entrance," he whispered. Marama nodded, pointing to a door that led to the servants' stairs. "But your car?" "I'll handle it." He dressed quickly, then pulled her into one last passionate kiss. "I'll call you later." "And Marama?" His eyes held hers intently. "No regrets." She watched him disappear through the door, then hurried to make herself presentable. By the time she opened the front door to Detective Rivera, there was no sign of her passionate night with Campbell Cash. But as she listened to the detective's update about new evidence in James's case, Marama's thoughts kept drifting to strong hands and tender kisses. She'd found something unexpected in the storm, not just passion, but understanding, acceptance, maybe even the beginnings of love. The question was, would it be strong enough to survive the storms still to come? In his office across town, Campbell sat at his desk, mind everywhere but on the contracts before him. He could still taste Marama's kisses, still feel her skin under his fingers. For the first time in years, his carefully ordered world felt alive with possibility. His phone buzzed with messages from his social circle, invitations, business proposals, the usual networking that kept his empire running. But all he could think about was finding a way back to that old mansion, back to the woman who had awakened something in him he'd thought long dead. "Mr. Cash," his assistant's voice broke through his reverie. "The board is waiting for the quarterly review." Campbell straightened his tie, a smile playing at his lips as he remembered Marama's fingers doing the same thing hours earlier. "Tell them I'll be right there." He had an empire to run, a reputation to maintain, but now he also had a secret that made all of it seem less important. The memory of a passionate night with a woman everyone warned him about. Let them warn him. Let them whisper their accusations and suspicions. Campbell Cash had found something real in Marama's arms, and he wasn't about to let it go. As he walked into the boardroom, projecting his usual confident authority, Campbell's mind was already planning his return to the Victorian mansion. He'd meant what he said. This was just the beginning. Back at the mansion, Marama stood in her studio, staring at a blank canvas. For months, she hadn't been able to paint, her creativity stifled by grief and accusations. But now, inspired by a night of unexpected passion, her fingers itched to create. She picked up a brush, dipped it in deep blues and stormy greys. As she worked, the painting took shape. A storm-tossed sea with a single light piercing the darkness. Without planning to, she'd captured the essence of her night with Campbell. Chaos and clarity, danger and shelter, passion and peace. Detective Rivera's words about new evidence should have been her focus, but all she could think about was the way Campbell had looked at her, touched her, made her feel alive again. It was dangerous, this growing feeling. The Kingston family would never accept it. Society would condemn it. But for the first time since James's death, Marama felt hope stirring in her heart. Perhaps love wasn't finished with her after all. The painting took form under her skilled hands, not just a seascape, but a metaphor for her life. The storm represented all she'd endured, while the light was Campbell, breaking through her darkness with unexpected warmth. She worked through the day, lost in creativity and memories of passionate embraces. When evening fell, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Dinner tonight? I know a private place where no one will recognize us." "See." Marama smiled, already knowing her answer. They were playing with fire, risking everything for this connection. But sometimes she was learning. The greatest risks brought the greatest rewards. She texted back a simple yes, then returned to her painting. The storm on her canvas was powerful, but the light piercing through it was stronger. Just like the passion she'd found in Campbell's arms, unexpected, overwhelming, and absolutely worth any price they might have to pay. Little did she know the price would be higher than either of them imagined. But that was still to come. For now, she had the memory of a passionate night and the promise of more to come. The grandfather clock struck noon, its chimes echoing through the old mansion. In 12 hours, she would see Campbell again. 12 hours to prepare herself for more stolen moments, more secret passion, more of whatever this thing between them was becoming. Outside, clouds gathered for another storm, but this time, Marama welcomed it. After all, it was a storm that had brought Campbell Cash to her door. What other gifts might the gathering darkness bring? She added final touches to her painting, hints of gold breaking through the storm clouds, suggesting hope and possibility. Just like the hope now blooming in her heart, despite all the reasons it shouldn't. The night of passion had changed everything. There was no going back now, only forward into unknown waters. But for the first time since James's death, Marama was ready to embrace whatever fate had in store. After all, she'd already survived the worst storm of her life. What was one more, especially with someone like Campbell Cash by her side? The painting dried as evening approached, capturing forever the moment when passion and possibility had overcome fear and loneliness. Soon she would dress for dinner with Campbell, ready to explore this unexpected connection further. But for now, she stood in her studio, surrounded by the evidence of her reawakened creativity, and smiled. Sometimes the greatest passions came from the darkest storms. And sometimes, just sometimes, those passions were worth any risk. The grandfather clock chimed again, counting down the hours until she would see Campbell. Until then, she had her art, her memories, and the warming knowledge that somehow, against all odds, love had found her again. Even if that love came wrapped in danger and secrecy, it was real. As real as the passion they'd shared, as real as the painting drying on her easel, as real as the hope now blooming in her heart. The storm was coming, but this time, Marama was ready for it. Chapter 6. Dangerous Attraction. The executive boardroom of Cash Industries fell silent as Campbell Cash strode in, 15 minutes late for his own meeting. His appearance was impeccable as always. Custom Tom Ford suit, perfectly knotted tie, not a hair out of place. But those who knew him well noticed something different in his bearing, a distraction in his usually laser-focused gaze. The Morrison merger, his CFO began, sliding documents across the polished mahogany table. They're getting cold feet. Campbell barely glanced at the papers. His mind was elsewhere, in a Victorian mansion across town where he'd spent every night for the past week. Instead of million-dollar deals, he was thinking of soft kisses and whispered conversations, of the way Marama's eyes lit up when she laughed. "Mr. Cash?" The CFO's concerned voice broke through his reverie. "The Morrison deal." "Let them sweat," Campbell replied, his trademark smirk falling into place. "They need this merger more than we do. Give them 48 hours to reconsider." The meeting continued, but Campbell's thoughts kept drifting. He'd never been like this before. Distracted, unfocused, counting the hours until he could slip away to see her again. Marama had become an obsession, a craving he couldn't control. His phone buzzed discreetly. A message from her. "Painting something new, thinking of you." A smile tugged at his lips before he could stop it. She'd been creating prolifically since their first night together, her art flowing from newly awakened emotions. He'd watched her paint the night before, mesmerized by the passion in her movements, the way she lost herself in the colors and canvas. "If there's nothing else," he stood abruptly, cutting short a presentation about quarterly projections. "I have another appointment." His executive team exchanged glances but knew better than to question him. Campbell Cash didn't explain himself to anyone. 20 minutes later, his Rolls-Royce pulled up to the now familiar gates of the Kingston estate. The property looked different in daylight. Still grand, but touched by decay like a dowager queen fallen on hard times. Campbell had offered to have it restored, but Marama refused. "Some things should stay weathered," she'd said. "It keeps them honest." He found her in her studio, paint splattered and beautiful. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows, catching the gold highlights in her hair. She didn't hear him enter, too absorbed in the massive canvas before her. Campbell stood quietly, watching her work. The painting was abstract, swirling colors that somehow captured the essence of their relationship. Passion and danger, beauty and risk, all intertwined on the canvas like their increasingly entangled lives. "You're early," Marama said without turning around. She always seemed to sense his presence now. Couldn't stay away. He moved behind her, arms sliding around her waist. "The board thinks I'm losing my mind." "Are you?" She leaned back against him, brush still poised over the canvas. "Completely." His lips found that sensitive spot behind her ear. "Absolutely. Deliciously." Paint and brushes clattered to the floor as Marama turned in his arms. Their kiss was hungry, desperate, the same intensity that marked every encounter since that first stormy night. "We should be more careful," she murmured against his lips. "Someone will notice." "Let them." But even as he said it, Campbell knew the risks. His empire was built on reputation and trust. Being linked to the notorious Black Widow of Kingston Street could destroy everything he'd built. Not that he cared in moments like this, with Marama warm and willing in his arms. The paint on her hands stained his expensive suit as she pulled him closer, but Campbell was beyond caring about anything except the taste of her lips and the soft sound she made when he touched her. They made love there in the studio, sunlight painting patterns across their entwined bodies. Afterward, lying on the paint-splattered dropcloth, Marama traced lazy patterns on Campbell's chest. "This can't last," she said softly. "You know that, right? Watch me make it last." He caught her hand, pressing kisses to her palm. "I'm not giving you up. Your board members, your business partners, they'll all say the same things. That I'm dangerous, that I killed James for his money, and I'll do the same to you." Campbell propped himself up on an elbow, studying her face. "Do you know what I see when I look at you? Not the woman they whisper about. I see strength, passion, an artist who pours her soul onto canvas, a woman who's survived hell without letting it break her spirit." Tears sparkled in Marama's eyes. "Don't make me fall in love with you, Campbell Cash. I couldn't survive losing everything again." Instead of answering, he kissed her, a kiss that promised protection, devotion, a future neither of them dared name yet. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. "Come to dinner with me," he said suddenly. "Tonight, in public." Marama stiffened. "You can't be serious." "Absolutely serious. The new French place downtown. Let me show the world I'm not ashamed to be seen with you. Your reputation means nothing compared to watching you hide away in this old house." He stood, pulling her up with him. "Get dressed up. Let me show you off." Hours later, Marama stood before her mirror, smoothing the silk of her black cocktail dress. She'd bought it months ago, before James's death, for some charity function they never attended. Now it felt like armor for the battle ahead. Campbell's Rolls-Royce arrived precisely at 8. He stepped out himself instead of sending his driver to the door, a statement in itself. When Marama opened the door, his appreciative whistle made her blush. "You're stunning," he said, drawing her into a kiss that threatened to derail their dinner plans entirely. The restaurant was exactly as exclusive as she'd expected, the kind of place that didn't need a sign out front, because if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. Heads turned as Campbell led her to their table, whispers following in their wake. "Isn't that the Kingston widow? Cash Industries CEO? Can't believe he'd risk." Campbell ignored them all, focusing entirely on Marama. He ordered wine, recommended the chef's specialties, kept up a stream of entertaining stories about his business adventures. But under the table, his hand found hers, squeezing reassuringly. They were halfway through their entrees when Isabella Kingston walked in. Marama saw her first, James's sister, arm in arm with some society bachelor, stopping dead in her tracks at the sight of them. The colour drained from Isabella's face, replaced by a fury that made her beautiful features ugly. "Well," Isabella's voice carried across the quiet restaurant. "I see you've found your next victim." Campbell started to rise, but Marama's hand on his arm stopped him. "Don't," she whispered. "She's not worth it." But Isabella was already approaching their table, her date trailing awkwardly behind. "Campbell Cash," she said, voice dripping with false concern. "I hope you've updated your life insurance. My brother did, just before he married her." The restaurant had gone silent, all eyes on their table. Campbell's jaw clenched, but before he could speak, Marama stood. "Isabella," she said calmly, "I am so sorry for your loss. I loved James deeply, and his death broke my heart. But these accusations, this hatred, it won't bring him back." "How dare you speak his name?" Isabella hissed. "How dare you sit here in public, flaunting your new conquest while James is barely cold in his grave?" "That's enough." Campbell's voice was quiet but carried unmistakable authority. "Miss Kingston, you're making a scene. I suggest you leave before I have security escort you out." Isabella's laugh was bitter. "Oh, defending her already, just like James did? Well, don't say you weren't warned when she—" "When I what?" Marama interrupted, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "When I kill him too? Is that what you were going to say? Because that's what this is really about, isn't it? You can't accept that James died of natural causes. You need someone to blame." The silence in the restaurant was absolute now. Even the kitchen staff had stopped to watch the drama unfolding. "Natural causes?" Isabella's voice rose. "A healthy man in his 30s just happens to die weeks after marrying you, and now here you are, already moving on to another wealthy man?" Campbell stood then, his height and presence commanding attention. "Miss Kingston, I'm only going to say this once. Leave, now, or I'll make sure every door in this city closes in your face instead of Marama's." The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Isabella stepped back, finally seeming to remember who she was dealing with. Campbell Cash's influence dwarfed even the Kingston families. "You've been warned," she spat, turning on her heel. "Don't come crying when she shows her true colors." After she stormed out, the restaurant slowly returned to normal, though whispers continued to circulate. Campbell signaled for the check. "I'm sorry," Marama said softly. "I knew this would happen." "Don't apologize." He took her hand across the table. "You handled that beautifully. It will be all over town by morning." "Good." His thumb stroked her palm. "Let them talk. Let them see I'm not hiding you away like some dirty secret." But they both knew it wasn't that simple. As they left the restaurant, photographers who certainly hadn't been there earlier snapped pictures. By morning, their relationship would be front-page news. Back at the mansion, Marama stood at her bedroom window, watching Campbell's car disappear down the drive. He'd wanted to stay, but they both needed time to process the evening's events. Her phone was already buzzing with messages, some supportive, most not. The Kingston family's influence ran deep, and now she'd apparently set her sights on an even bigger target. In his penthouse across town, Campbell poured himself a scotch and stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city lights. His phone, too, was filling with messages, concerned board members, nosy reporters, social connections choosing sides. He didn't care. The memory of Marama standing up to Isabella, defending their relationship with quiet dignity, only confirmed what he already knew. She was worth any risk, any cost to his reputation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The photos would hit the society pages, rumors would spread, business associates would question his judgment. But for the first time in his life, Campbell Cash was following his heart instead of his head. Because when he looked at Marama, he saw something real in a world of facades, something worth fighting for, something worth risking everything to protect. The dangerous attraction between them had become something deeper, stronger, more permanent. Let the world whisper, Let them judge. Campbell had found something genuine in Marama's arms, and he wasn't about to let anyone tear them apart. Little did he know, the whispers were already starting. Warnings would soon reach his ears, poisoning their perfect connection with doubt and suspicion. But that was still to come. For now, separated by miles but connected by growing emotions, both Marama and Campbell stood at their respective windows, watching the city lights flicker like stars, each thinking of the other and the storm they'd just weathered together. It wouldn't be their last storm, but they were learning that sometimes the most dangerous attractions led to the strongest loves. And sometimes, just sometimes, those loves were worth any price the world demanded. Chapter 7. Poisoned Truth. The morning sun painted Maxwell Wright's office in harsh light as he laid out the evidence before Campbell Cash. Each photograph, each document landed like a physical blow against everything Campbell had come to believe about love. "You're sure?" Campbell's voice was barely recognizable, even to himself. He stared at the surveillance photos. Marama entering a notorious pharmaceutical supplier's building just days before James Kingston's death. Triple-checked everything. Maxwell's expression held genuine regret. The supplier specializes in untraceable poisons that mimic natural causes. 3 days after this photo, she met with an offshore banker. Day after that, she took out an insurance policy on James Kingston's life. Campbell's fingers traced the grainy image of Marama in oversized sunglasses, hurrying from the building's shadow. He remembered how she'd looked just hours ago, sleeping peacefully in his bed, her artist's hands curled trustingly against his chest. "There's more." Maxwell hesitated, then produced a thick file. The Kingston family's private investigator had this original toxicology report, suppressed during the initial investigation, traces of a synthetic compound that causes heart failure. The same compound this supplier is known for. Why release this now? Campbell's mind raced, seeking alternatives, explanations, anything to combat the growing horror. Isabella Kingston approached one of our board members. Said if we didn't act on the information, they'd go public. Stock would plummet. The empire you've built. Maxwell let the implications hang. Campbell stood abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked the city. From 50 stories up, everything looked small, manageable. But this threatened to destroy not just his heart, but everything he'd built. "She's pregnant." The words fell like stones. "If what you're saying is true, then she's more dangerous than anyone imagined." Maxwell's voice softened with genuine concern. "Boss, you need to protect yourself. Legally, financially. Get out. Campbell, get out!" Alone in the office, Campbell pulled up security footage from his building's lobby. There was Marama just yesterday, laughing with the security guard, her artist's bag slung carelessly over one shoulder. Nothing in her manner suggested a calculating killer. But then, hadn't James's family said the same? That she'd played the perfect wife, the devoted partner, right until the moment. His phone buzzed, a message from her. "Missing you already. Studio's too quiet without you distracting me. Come over tonight." Each word felt poisoned now. How many similar messages had she sent James? How many times had she played the devoted lover while plotting destruction? Rain began to fall as his car wound through the city toward her mansion. The same route he'd taken that first stormy night, when his car had conveniently broken down near her door. Had even that been planned? Had everything between them been calculated? Marama opened the door, wearing one of his shirts, paint streaking her hands, her smile pure sunshine. "You're early. I was just finishing a new piece." Her voice died as she saw his expression. The smile faded, replaced by something wary, wounded. "What's wrong?" Campbell pushed past her into the foyer, the evidence file heavy in his hands. The house suddenly felt different, not the warm sanctuary of their love, but a killer's lair, where another wealthy man had drawn his last breath. "We need to talk." His voice was arctic. "About James Kingston's death." Marama's face went still. "What about it?" "The pharmaceutical supplier you visited 3 days before he died, the offshore account you opened, the insurance policy." Each accusation fell like a hammer blow. The poison that stopped his heart. "What are you talking about?" But her face had gone pale, her hands trembling slightly. "What poison?" Campbell threw the file onto her antique coffee table. Documents and photographs scattered like accusations, her eyes fixed on the surveillance photo, recognition flashing before she masked it. "I can explain." "Can you?" Rage and heartbreak twisted his voice. "Can you explain why you were meeting with someone known for selling untraceable poisons? Why you took out an insurance policy days before your husband conveniently died of natural causes?" Marama picked up the pharmacy photograph with shaking hands. "You've been investigating me? My head of security has. Apparently he's not the only one." Campbell ran a hand through his hair. "The Kingston family has evidence, Marama. Real evidence." "Evidence of what?" Her voice had gone very quiet. "Of murder?" "Did you do it?" He had to ask, had to know. "Did you kill James for his money? Are you trying to do the same to me?" The sound that escaped her wasn't quite a laugh. "Is that what you think? That I've been playing you? That everything between us has been some elaborate scheme?" "I don't know what to think." Campbell's control snapped. "I look at this evidence and it's damning. But then I look at you, and I see..." His voice broke. "I see the woman I've fallen in love with." Tears spilled down Marama's cheeks. "The pharmacy," she said softly. "I was there for medication. James had been having chest pains, but he refused to see a doctor. His family's pride. They had a history of heart problems they didn't want anyone to know about. I thought if I could get him something for the pain." She moved to the antique desk in the corner, pulling out a small box. Inside were prescription bottles and receipts. "I kept everything. The medication was legitimate, prescribed under a false name because the Kingstons wouldn't admit their perfect son needed help. The insurance policy was his idea. He knew something was wrong, wanted to make sure I was protected." Campbell stared at the evidence of a different truth. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it doesn't matter." Marama's voice rose. "No one wants to believe the truth. They've already decided I'm guilty. Even you." Her voice shattered. "Even you would rather believe I'm a murderer than trust what we have is real." The hurt in her voice cut through his doubts, but the damage was done. He moved toward her, but she backed away, arms wrapped protectively around herself. "Don't." Ice had replaced the warmth in her voice. "You've made your choice. You chose to believe them over me. Marama, get out." She turned away, shoulders shaking. "Just go. Not until you hear me out." "Hear what?" She whirled to face him. "More accusations? More evidence of my guilt? I loved James Campbell. I loved him, and I couldn't save him, and I've spent every day since then being punished for it. And now..." A sob escaped her. "Now I've been foolish enough to love again, only to have history repeat itself." The admission of love should have been a moment of joy. Instead, it felt like a farewell. "I'm sorry," Campbell said softly. "I should have trusted you." "Yes, you should have." Marama straightened her spine. "Goodbye, Campbell." He wanted to argue, to pull her into his arms and kiss away her tears, but he'd broken something precious with his accusations, and no amount of apologies could fix it. Not tonight. The rain had turned to a downpour when he left. Through the window, he saw Marama sink to the floor, her body racked with sobs. Every instinct screamed at him to go back, to hold her, to beg forgiveness. Instead, he got into his car and drove away, leaving behind the woman he loved and the truth he should have believed in. In his rearview mirror, A single light burned in the mansion's window, just like that first stormy night when he'd found shelter and love in an accused widow's home. Now he'd destroyed that shelter with his own doubts, his own failure to trust. The rain fell harder, matching the tears he finally let fall. He'd gained evidence, but lost something far more precious, the trust of a woman who'd already been betrayed too many times. What he didn't know, couldn't know, was that in her silent grief, Marama was protecting more than just her broken heart. In her womb, new life was growing, a secret that would eventually bring them back together. But for now, they remained apart, separated by poison more lethal than any drug, the poison of doubt, of trust betrayed, of love wounded by suspicion. Thunder rolled across the city like nature's own accusation, while in two different locations, two hearts broke in perfect synchronization. The night grew darker, but neither found peace. Sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes truth comes too late. And sometimes the hardest battle isn't fighting the world's accusations, it's fighting the doubts in your own heart. But this wasn't the end of their story. It was merely the darkest hour before a dawn neither could yet imagine. A dawn that would bring with it revelations, redemption, and a love strong enough to overcome any poison, even the poison of doubt. Chapter 8. Silent Goodbye. Dawn crept through Marama's studio windows, finding her exactly where she'd been all night, surrounded by the wreckage of paintings that had once told a love story. Canvas after canvas lay destroyed, slash marks through images of storms and passion and trust. Only one piece remained untouched, her first painting after meeting Campbell, the stormy seascape with its piercing light. Her hand gripped the knife, hovering over this last testament to their love. A wave of nausea hit her suddenly, and the blade clattered to the floor. Morning sickness, she realized distantly, though she hadn't confirmed her suspicions yet. Another secret to carry, another reason to run. "Mihija?" Mrs. Rodriguez's voice carried concern as she entered the studio. "What have you done?" Marama didn't turn around, still staring at the surviving painting. "Erasing mistakes. Just like last time." "No." The older woman's footsteps crunched over broken frames. "Last time you were hiding, this time you're running. Is there a difference?" "See." Mrs. Rodriguez touched her shoulder gently. "Hiding is what prey does. Running is what survivors do. Which are you?" The question hung in the air as Marama finally turned to face her oldest friend. In the morning light, tear tracks silvered her cheeks, but her eyes held steel. "I survived James's death," she said quietly. "I survived their accusations, their hatred, their attempts to destroy me. But this—" her hand pressed unconsciously against her still flat stomach. "I won't survive watching Campbell's love turn to suspicion as I grow bigger with his child. I won't let another baby be born into whispers and doubt." Mrs. Rodriguez's sharp intake of breath confirmed she understood. "You're certain?" "Certain enough to know I need to leave before he finds out. Before anyone finds out." Marama moved to the window, watching the city wake up. "I won't have my child grow up wondering if their mother is a murderer. He would support you." "Would he?" Marama's laugh was bitter. "He couldn't even trust me about James's death. How long before he starts wondering if I'm trapping him? How long before he starts investigating every move I make, questioning every decision about his child?" The sound of tires on gravel made them both tense. Through the window, they watched Campbell's Rolls-Royce approach the mansion, then turn away at the gates. He'd been doing this all night, driving by but never entering, as if waging his own battle between doubt and love. "At least tell him about the baby," Mrs. Rodriguez pleaded. "No." Marama's voice was final. "Not until I know if I'm keeping it. Not until I decide if I'm strong enough to be a single mother with a ruined reputation." She moved through the studio, gathering supplies, paints, brushes, the tools of her trade. These she wouldn't leave behind. Art had saved her once, it would save her again. Where will you go? Don't ask me that. Marama paused in her packing. What you don't know, you can't tell them. Just watch over the house, in case ... She couldn't finish the sentence. In case what? In case Campbell came looking for her? In case she changed her mind? In case the truth finally came out and she could return with her head held high? The next hours passed in a blur of necessary decisions. Bank accounts closed, gallery contacts notified, a few precious mementos packed. Everything else would stay, testament to another life she was leaving behind. Her phone buzzed constantly, messages from Campbell that she couldn't bear to read. Each one felt like another crack in her resolve. Finally, she placed the phone on her bed, alongside a single sheet of paper. On it, she'd written just 2 words. Goodbye, Campbell. No explanations, no accusations, no declarations of love or hate. Just a simple farewell to match his simple betrayal. The taxi waited at the gates as sunset painted the sky in colors too beautiful for such a painful day. Marama took one last look at the mansion, at the studio where she'd rediscovered her passion, at the living room where she'd found love again, at the memories she was leaving behind. "Are you sure about this?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked one final time, tears in her eyes. Marama's smile was sad but determined. "Number. But I'm doing it anyway. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is walk away before love turns to hate." She hugged the older woman fiercely, inhaling the familiar scent of comfort and wisdom. "Take care of yourself, Mama Rosa, and when they come looking—" "I'll say nothing," Mrs. Rodriguez promised. "But Nina, remember, running doesn't mean forever. Sometimes we run so we can return stronger." As the taxi pulled away, storm clouds gathered overhead, nature's own farewell to a woman who had weathered so many storms already. But this time, Marama wasn't afraid of the rain. She'd survived losing James. She'd survived the accusations and isolation. She would survive losing Campbell too. The first drops fell as the mansion disappeared from view. Marama didn't look back. She'd spent too long looking back, letting the past define her future. It was time to write her own story, not just for herself now, but for the tiny life beginning inside her. What she didn't know, couldn't know, was that this departure would set in motion events that would eventually lead to redemption. That sometimes running away is the first step on the path back home. For now, she was simply a woman, leaving behind the ruins of another broken love, heading toward an uncertain future with nothing but her art and her determination to guide her. And deep inside, a secret heartbeat that would eventually bring everything full circle. Back at the mansion, Mrs. Rodriguez watched the taxi disappear into the gathering storm. She looked at the destroyed paintings in the studio, at the empty rooms echoing with absence, at the phone on the bed with its dozens of unread messages. When Campbell Cash arrived hours later, desperate and disheveled, she simply handed him the farewell note and shook her head at his questions. "She's gone," was all she would say. "And this time, mijijo, you have only yourself to blame." Campbell stood in Marama's empty bedroom, clutching her brief goodbye, surrounded by the ghosts of their love. Outside, the storm raged on, but he barely noticed. He'd driven her away with his doubts, his investigation, his failure to trust his heart over evidence. Now she was gone, leaving nothing but memories and the bitter taste of regret. What he didn't know, couldn't know, was that he'd lost more than just Marama. Their love had created something neither had planned for, a truth that would eventually bring them back together in ways neither could imagine. But that was still to come. For now, 2 hearts beat in painful synchronization, separated by pride and pain and poisoned truth. And in the gathering storm, a taxi carried Marama Helene toward a new life, while behind her, Campbell Cash held a 2-word goodbye that felt like a novel of loss. Goodbye, Campbell. Two words that ended one chapter but unknowingly began another. Two words that would haunt them both until fate decided it was time for their paths to cross again. The storm continued through the night, nature's own tribute to a love that had burned bright and died quick. Or had it? Only time would tell, and time, like love, kept its own counsel. Chapter 9. The Truth Emerges. 3 months after Marama's disappearance, Campbell Cash sat in his darkened office, staring at the city lights below. The Morrison merger had gone through, adding billions to his empire, but he felt nothing. Success tasted like ashes without her. A knock at his door broke through his brooding. "Not now," he called out, but Maxwell Wright entered anyway, carrying a thick folder. "You need to see this," his head of security said, face grave. "I made a mistake, boss. A terrible mistake." Campbell didn't move. He'd barely spoken to Maxwell since the night Marama left, holding him partially responsible for destroying the only real thing in his life. "Whatever it is, it's about her." Maxwell's voice cracked. "About Marama. I was wrong. We were all wrong." That got Campbell's attention. He turned from the window as Maxwell spread documents across his desk. "Remember that toxicology report? The one that showed traces of poison?" Maxwell's hands trembled slightly. It was fake. The Kingston family's investigator fabricated it. Campbell's world tilted on its axis. "What?" "I've spent 3 months digging deeper, trying to understand why something felt off." Maxwell pulled out more papers. "The original report shows exactly what the police said. James Kingston died of natural causes, a genetic heart condition that runs in the family. The pharmacy photo was real, but not what we thought." Another document appeared. "I found the prescription records. James had been seeing a doctor secretly, against his family's wishes. The medication was legitimate, prescribed for chest pain." Campbell's hands clenched on his desk. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I found something else." Maxwell's voice dropped. "The Kingston family knew. They knew about James's heart condition, about the family history of cardiac problems. They knew Marama was innocent. Then why?" Campbell stood, rage building. "Why destroy her reputation? Why accuse her of murder?" "Pride." Maxwell spread out newspaper clippings. "The Kingstons have been hiding their genetic heart condition for generations. If it became public knowledge that James died from it, their carefully constructed image of genetic superiority would crumble. Better to blame the wife than admit their perfect bloodline was flawed." Campbell stared at the evidence of Marama's innocence. All this time, all these months of missing her, hating himself for doubting her. "Does she know?" "No one knows where she is." Maxwell hesitated. "But there's more." "More? What else could there possibly be?" "I found these in the Kingston family's private records." He pulled out medical files. James had been trying to get his family to acknowledge the heart condition for years. He knew he was at risk. That's why he pushed for such a quick wedding with Marama. "I don't understand." "He loved her, yes, but he also wanted to marry before—" Maxwell swallowed hard. "Before the condition could take him. He wanted her protected, provided for. The insurance policy wasn't her idea. It was his last attempt to take care of her." Campbell sank back into his chair, overwhelmed by the truth. He doubted her, accused her, driven her away, and all along she'd been innocent. Worse, she'd been a victim of the Kingston family's pride and manipulation. "Find her!" His voice was rough with emotion. "Whatever it takes, find her." "Already working on it." Maxwell pulled out one final document. "She closed all her accounts here, but I traced a wire transfer to a small gallery in Paris. She's been selling paintings under a different name." Hope flared in Campbell's chest. "What name?" "Helena James, using her middle name and James's first name." Campbell was already reaching for his phone, calling his pilot. "Get the jet ready. Now, boss." Maxwell caught his arm. "There's something else you should know. Something about Isabella Kingston." "What about her?" "She's been receiving large payments from a private account. Payments that started right after James's death." Maxwell's expression was grim. "I think she was part of the conspiracy to blame Marama. She knew her brother had a heart condition, knew Marama was innocent, but helped spread the murder accusations anyway." Campbell's rage threatened to overwhelm him. "Why? Inheritance." Another document appeared. If Marama was convicted of James's murder, or even just driven away by the accusations, the Kingston fortune would pass to Isabella instead. The pieces fell into place. The vicious accusations, the faked evidence, the constant attacks on Marama's character. It had all been a calculated plan to protect the family's reputation and secure Isabella's inheritance. "Get me everything," Campbell ordered. "Every document, every piece of evidence. I want the whole truth." "Already done." Maxwell handed over a USB drive. "Everything's here, the real medical records, the fake toxicology report, the money transfers to Isabella, all of it." Campbell stared at the small device that held the key to clearing Marama's name. "Make it public. All of it. The Kingston family will fight back. Let them." Campbell's voice was steel. "They destroyed an innocent woman's life to protect their pride and greed. It's time they faced the consequences." As Maxwell left to set things in motion, Campbell turned back to the city lights. Somewhere out there, Marama was building a new life, probably still believing he had betrayed her trust. The thought was unbearable. His phone buzzed, the pilot confirming the jet would be ready in an hour. Paris. She was in Paris, using a name that honored both her past and her lost love. The symbolism wasn't lost on him. Campbell pulled out the farewell note he still carried everywhere, 2 words that had haunted him for months. "Goodbye, Campbell." "Not goodbye," he promised silently. "Not this time." In his mind, he could see her that last morning, destroying her paintings in a fit of pain and betrayal. He destroyed something far more precious, her trust, her love, their future together. But now he had the truth. Now he could prove what his heart should have known all along, that Marama was innocent, that their love had been real, that his doubts had been planted by those with darker motives. The question was, would it be enough? Would she forgive him for failing to trust his heart over manufactured evidence? Would she give him a chance to make amends? There was only one way to find out. As his car sped toward the private airport, Campbell reviewed the evidence again. Each document showed not just Marama's innocence, but the depth of the conspiracy against her. The Kingston family's desperation to hide their genetic flaw had nearly destroyed an innocent woman's life. His pilot met him at the plane. "Weather's clear to Paris, sir. We can be there in 8 hours." 8 hours. After 3 months of emptiness, 8 hours seemed both an eternity and no time at all. As the jet took off into the night sky, Campbell thought about second chances and redemption. He'd built his empire on being right about people and situations, on trusting his instincts in business. But when it mattered most, with the woman he loved, he'd let doubt override his heart. Now he had to hope it wasn't too late to make things right. What he didn't know, couldn't know, was that fate had already ensured their paths would cross again. In Paris, Marama was about to discover something that would change everything. But that was still to come. For now, Campbell Cash flew toward the City of Light, carrying truth like a torch to illuminate the darkness he'd helped create. Whether that light would be enough to rekindle what they'd lost remained to be seen. The truth had finally emerged. The question was, what would they build from its ashes? As his plane crossed the Atlantic, Campbell made silent promises to the woman he loved, promises of trust, of faith, of a love strong enough to overcome any doubt. Whether she would give him the chance to keep those promises was another matter entirely. The truth had finally emerged. Now it was time to see if love could do the same. Chapter 10. Crisis Point. Paris in autumn painted the city in shades of gold and amber. Campbell stood outside a small gallery in Montmartre, staring at a familiar signature on the canvas displayed in the window. She'd changed the style slightly, but he'd know her brushstrokes anywhere. Bold, passionate, full of barely contained emotion. "Monsieur Cash?" The gallery owner approached, recognition in her eyes. "We've been expecting you." Campbell turned, surprised. "You have?" "Oui. Mademoiselle Helena called from the hospital. She said you might come." His heart stopped. "Hospital? Which hospital?" "Saint-Antoine. She was taken there this morning after—" The woman hesitated. "Perhaps you should go to her." Campbell was already moving, phone out to call his driver. The short drive to the hospital felt endless, his mind racing with possibilities. Was she hurt? Ill? Had something happened to make her reach out after all this time? At the hospital, he found himself directed to the maternity ward. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Maternity. She was pregnant. With his child. He found her in a private room, standing by the window with one hand pressed against the glass, the other resting on her clearly visible bump. She didn't turn when he entered, though he knew she heard him. 3 months, she said quietly. That's how long it took you to find the truth. Marama. His voice cracked on her name. I wondered if you ever would. She finally turned, and the sight of her took his breath away. Pregnancy suited her. She glowed with it despite the hospital setting. Or if you'd stay comfortable in your doubts. I was wrong. Campbell took a step forward, then stopped when she tensed. About everything. The Kingston family, they fabricated evidence, conspired to hide the truth about James's condition. I know. Her smile was sad. Detective Rivera found me 2 months ago, showed me everything. The fake toxicology report, Isabella's involvement, all of it. Campbell's hands clenched at his sides, fighting the urge to reach for her. Why didn't you contact me? Why should I? Her voice held no anger, only a bone-deep weariness. You chose to believe I was a murderer. You threw away what we had because of some circumstantial evidence and whispered accusations. I'm sorry. The words felt inadequate. I've never been so sorry about anything in my life. Marama moved to sit on the edge of the hospital bed, one hand still cradling her belly. I'm not interested in apologies, Campbell. I've moved on, built a new life, found success with my art. And our child. He gestured to her stomach. Were you ever going to tell me? I haven't decided. She met his gaze steadily. This baby deserves better than a father who'll question her mother's every move, who'll always wonder if she's secretly plotting something. The words hit him like bullets. I would never. You already did. Marama's composure cracked slightly. You looked me in the eyes and asked if I murdered James, if I was planning to murder you too. How can I trust you with our daughter after that? Daughter! Something shifted in Campbell's chest. It's a girl? Marama's hand moved protectively over her bump. Yes. Not that it matters. You should go, Campbell. Go back to your empire and your carefully ordered world where everything makes sense. Instead of leaving, he moved closer, dropping to his knees beside the bed. I'm not going anywhere. Not this time. Not ever again. Campbell, listen to me. He caught her hand, relieved when she didn't pull away. I was wrong. Monumentally, unforgivably wrong. I let other people's suspicions poison what we had. I failed to trust my heart, failed to trust you. Tears spilled down Marama's cheeks. Trust once broken can be rebuilt. He pressed his forehead to their joined hands. I'll spend the rest of my life proving that to you if you'll let me. Let me be part of our daughter's life. Let me show you that I've learned from my mistakes. How can I? Her voice broke. How can I risk my heart, our daughter's heart, on promises you've already broken once? Because I love you. Campbell looked up, letting her see the truth in his eyes. I loved you then, even when doubt clouded my judgment. I love you now, even more for the strength you've shown in building a new life, and I'll love you forever, if you give me the chance to prove it. A monitor beeped, making them both jump. The baby had shifted, causing a spike in Marama's heart rate. She moves a lot, Marama said softly, especially when she hears voices, when she hears you. She knows her father's voice? I dot. Marama hesitated. I may have played her some of your television interviews, just so she'd know what you sound like. Hope bloomed in Campbell's chest. You wanted her to know me. Of course I did. Fresh tears fell. I've spent months hating you for doubting me, for breaking my trust, but I never stopped loving you. How could I, when every kick, every movement reminds me of what we shared? Campbell rose from his knees, perching carefully on the bed beside her. Then let me prove myself worthy of that love, of both of you. Marama looked away. The Kingston family is being exposed as we speak. He touched her chin gently, turning her face back to his. Maxwell found evidence of their conspiracy. The fake toxicology report, Isabella's payoffs, everything. By tomorrow, the whole world will know the truth. It won't change what happened between us. No. Campbell's thumb brushed away her tears. But it can change what happens next, if you'll let it. A knock at the door interrupted them. A doctor entered, smiling at the sight of them together. Madame Helena, your blood pressure has stabilized, but we'd like to keep you overnight for observation. Marama nodded, then looked at Campbell. You should go. Get some rest. I'm not leaving. His voice was firm. I've spent 3 months without you. I won't waste another minute. After the doctor left, silence fell between them. Outside the window, Paris sparkled in the gathering dusk, the Eiffel Tower lighting up like a beacon of hope. Tell me about her, Campbell said finally. About our daughter. Something softened in Marama's expression. She's active, strong. The doctors say she's perfectly healthy. I've been painting her nursery with clouds and stars. As she talked, Campbell watched the way her whole face lit up. This was a different Marama from the wounded woman he'd driven away 3 months ago. Motherhood had given her a new strength, a fierce determination he found breathtaking. I want to be part of this, he said when she finished. Part of her life, part of yours, if you'll have me. It won't be easy. Marama's hand found his. Trust takes time to rebuild. We have time. Campbell's fingers intertwined with hers. We have the rest of our lives. Their eyes met, and for a moment the past 3 months fell away. All the pain, all the doubt, all the accusations, none of it mattered compared to the miracle growing between them. Stay tonight, Marama said softly. Just stay. We can figure out the rest tomorrow. Campbell brought their joined hands to his lips. Tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after. Outside, Paris continued its eternal dance of light and shadow. Inside the hospital room, 2 hearts began the slow process of healing, while between them their daughter kicked, as if reminding them that love, like life, finds a way to persist even in the darkest times. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a beginning. And sometimes beginnings are all you need to rewrite an ending. The crisis point had passed. Now came the harder part, rebuilding what they'd lost, one careful piece at a time. But as Marama drifted off to sleep, her hand still clasped in Campbell's, both felt something they hadn't expected to find again. Hope. Hope for tomorrow. Hope for their daughter. hope for a love strong enough to overcome any crisis. The night deepened outside their window, but inside, light had finally begun to dawn. Chapter 11. The Fight for Love. 1,095 days. Each one a battle. Each one a test. Each one a chance to prove that love could overcome doubt. That trust once broken could be rebuilt stronger than before. Campbell Cash didn't just count the days. He bled for them. Year 1. The price of pride. The Kingston family's disgrace should have made things easier. Instead, it nearly destroyed everything. Isabella, desperate to maintain relevance, launched a vicious media campaign painting Campbell as Marama's next victim. "He'll end up just like my brother," she warned on national television. "Dead within a year, his fortune in her hands. She's already trapped him with a child." The accusations hit Wall Street hard. Cash Industries stock plummeted 40% in a single day. Shareholders demanded Campbell's resignation, claiming his personal drama threatened their investments. "Step down," his board advised, "just temporarily, until this blows over." Campbell's response was to mortgage everything he owned, liquidate his personal assets, and buy controlling interest in his own company. "I built this empire," he told the shocked board members. "I'll burn it to the ground before I let anyone use it to hurt her or our daughter." The move cost him billions, but sent a clear message. He would sacrifice everything for his family. But money was the easy battle. The real war was proving himself worthy of Marama's trust while protecting Luna from the media circus. Death threats arrived daily at Marama's gallery, black roses and newspaper clippings about James's death. Campbell hired round-the-clock security, but Marama refused to hide. "I won't live in fear," she declared, still showing up to work despite the threats. "I won't let them cage me again." Campbell respected her independence, but it tortured him. Every morning he watched from his car as she entered the gallery, his heart stopping until she was safely inside. Every evening he followed her home at a distance, making sure she arrived unharmed. The day Luna spoke her first word, "Dada," 3 different tabloids ran paternity stories questioning if the baby was his. Campbell responded by having a DNA test done immediately, not because he doubted, but to silence the whispers before they could reach Luna's innocent ears. "You didn't have to do that," Marama said when he showed her the results. "Yes, I did." His voice was steel. "No one will ever question her place in my life, or yours." The test results made headlines, but not in the way he'd expected. "Cashier demands paternity test," screamed the tabloids, twisting his protective gesture into one of doubt. Marama's voice was ice when she saw the headlines. "Still investigating me, Campbell?" The setback cost him months of progress, but still, he fought on. Year 2. The Empire Strikes. The business world smelled blood in the water. Hostile takeover attempts came from every direction. Competitors who'd feared Campbell Cash now saw him as vulnerable, distracted by personal drama. Working 20-hour days, he fought to save his company while still making time for every moment of Luna's life. Board meetings conducted with a sleeping toddler in his arms. $1 million deals negotiated between diaper changes. His office became a nursery, his corporate image transformed from ruthless CEO to devoted father. But the real challenge came when Marama suffered severe postpartum depression. The old accusations mixed with new hormones to create a perfect storm of self-doubt. "Maybe they're right," she whispered one particularly dark night. "Maybe I destroy everything I touch." Campbell found her in her studio at 3 a.m., about to destroy her paintings again. He caught her hands, pulled her close, let her cry out the poison of doubt. "You create beauty," he insisted. "You created Luna. You created love in a heart I thought was frozen. Never doubt your power to build, not destroy." The moment was a breakthrough, but the war was far from over. Isabella Kingston, desperate to maintain relevance, wrote a tell-all book about James's death. The manuscript contained just enough truth mixed with lies to be devastating. Campbell's lawyers wanted to bury it in injunctions. Instead, he did something radical. He gave Isabella a choice. Print the truth, he offered during a private meeting, all of it, including your family's cover-up of the heart condition, and I'll finance the publication myself. Continue the lies, and I'll buy every publishing house in the country to make sure your words never see daylight. Isabella chose truth, though her version painted her as another victim of family pride. The book actually helped, bringing closure to whispers that had festered too long. But the greatest battles weren't public. They were private, intimate moments of trust, rebuilt one painful brick at a time. The first time Marama called him for help with Luna's fever, choosing to trust him in a crisis. The first time she let him stay over, just to talk, both aware of the bed they weren't sharing. The first time she showed him a new painting before it was finished, making herself vulnerable to his opinion. Year 3. The final test. Just when progress seemed certain, disaster struck. A young socialite claimed Campbell had fathered her child, producing doctored photos and fake texts as evidence. The scandal exploded just as Marama had begun to fully trust again. Campbell didn't just deny it, he went nuclear. His investigators traced the plot to its source, Isabella Kingston's desperate last attempt to destroy their happiness. DNA test, he offered immediately, and then lawsuit. I'll destroy anyone who threatens what we're building. But Marama surprised him. No, she said calmly, I believe you. Those 3 words, I believe you, marked the real turning point in their journey. Trust freely given, without proof demanded. The socialite's story crumbled under scrutiny, but Marama's faith never wavered. Campbell marked each milestone not with celebration, but with quiet gratitude. He learned to read Marama's silences, to understand when she needed space and when she needed presence. He learned to be patient when old fears surfaced, to stand firm when doubts threatened. Luna, now a precocious toddler, watched her parents' careful dance with innocent wisdom. "Daddy loves Mommy," she would announce to anyone who listened. "He just has to prove it lots." The proof came in consistent moments, never missing a promise, no matter how small, showing up unannounced with soup when Marama had a cold, defending her publicly while respecting her privacy, learning when to fight her battles and when to let her fight them herself. Then came the ultimate test. The Kingston family, facing financial ruin, offered Campbell a deal: buy their remaining assets at a fraction of their worth, securing his empire's future. The catch? He had to publicly denounce Marama, support their original accusations. The business world thought it was an easy choice. The deal would make him the undisputed king of their industry. Instead, Campbell called a press conference. 3 years ago, he told the assembled media, I let doubt poison the purest thing in my life. I chose evidence over heart, suspicion over trust. That mistake cost me the woman I love and nearly cost me my daughter. I've spent every day since then proving that love is stronger than doubt, that trust once broken can be rebuilt. He turned to face the cameras directly. To the Kingston family I say this: keep your empire. I've built something far more valuable, a family based on trust and truth. I choose them. I will always choose them. The next morning, he found Marama in her studio, working on an unusual piece. Instead of her typical oils, she used mixed media, print articles about James's death, Isabella's accusations, the DNA results, all woven into a phoenix rising from ashes. It's us, she explained, adding golden threads through the darkness. All of it, the pain, the growth, the healing. I couldn't have created this 3 years ago. It's beautiful, Campbell said softly, like you, like our journey. Marama turned to face him, paint smudged across her cheek, just like that first stormy night. 3 years of fighting for us. Was it worth it? Campbell's answer was to kneel, not with a ring, but with truth. Every second, every battle, every moment of doubt overcome by choice and faith. I'll spend the next 30 years proving it if you'll let me. I don't need more proof. Marama pulled him up into her arms. I need my partner, my daughter's father, my love. Their kiss tasted of paint and promises, of battles won and lessons learned. When they broke apart, both were crying. "Marry me," they said simultaneously, then laughed through their tears. Luna found them like that, dancing in the paint-splattered studio. She joined their embrace, completing the circle of healing. The fight had been brutal, beautiful, and absolutely worth every scar it left, because sometimes the hardest battles lead to the greatest victories, and sometimes love has to be fought for before it can be truly won. 3 years, 1,095 days, each one a step toward redemption, each one a proof of love's power to heal, to rebuild, to triumph. The war was over, love had won, and somewhere in the city storm clouds gathered, not threatening this time, but promising future gardens, future growth, future joy. The kind of future that only comes after fighting through the darkest nights to reach the brightest dawn. Chapter 12. Love Triumphant. The morning of their wedding dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect autumn day that seemed crafted by fate itself. Marama stood at her studio window, watching the sun paint the city in shades of gold and promise. Behind her, her wedding dress hung like a beacon, not traditional white, but a masterpiece in champagne silk, hand-painted with delicate golden flowers, each one representing a milestone in their journey back to each other. "Mummy, you look like an angel!" Luna twirled into the room in her flower girl dress, dark curls bouncing. At 4 years old, she was the perfect blend of both parents, Campbell's determination with Marama's artistic soul. "And you, my love, look like a princess." Marama scooped up their daughter, breathing in the scent of childhood and joy. "Are you ready for your special job today?" "Uh-huh. I practiced with Daddy all week." Luna's face turned serious. "He cried when we practiced, but don't tell him I told you." Marama's heart swelled. The mighty Campbell cash, brought to tears by a wedding rehearsal with their daughter. How far they'd come from those dark days of doubt and accusation. The wedding venue wasn't a church or grand hotel, but the gallery where Marama's work had first been recognized. Her paintings lined the walls, the story of their love told in color and light. The centerpiece was her latest work, a massive triptych showing their journey from that first stormy night through the darkness to this moment of triumph. As she prepared for the ceremony, familiar faces arrived. Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd stood by her through everything, fussed with her hair and veil. Detective Rivera, who'd helped uncover the truth about James's death, came early to ensure security was perfect. Even Maxwell Wright, Campbell's head of security, who'd once doubted her, arrived with a gift, the original file that had started their troubles, now sealed with a golden ribbon. "A reminder," he said gruffly, "that truth always comes to light." The Kingston family's fall from grace had been complete. Isabella's tell-all book had exposed generations of lies, not just about James's death, but about the family's carefully constructed image. She'd tried to crash the wedding preparations the day before, but Campbell's security had quietly removed her. "Some people," Campbell had said afterward, holding Marama close, "never learn that love is stronger than hate." Now, as the ceremony approached, Marama added final touches to her appearance. Her something old was a locket containing tiny photos of both James and Campbell, honoring the past while embracing the future. Her something new was a delicate gold bracelet Campbell had given her, engraved with their journey's timeline. Something borrowed came from Mrs. Rodriguez, a pair of pearl earrings that had seen 3 generations of love stories, and something blue. The sapphire ring that had started their original romance, now reset as a right-hand reminder of lessons learned. "It's time," Mrs. Rodriguez announced, tears in her eyes. "He's waiting." The gallery had been transformed. Hundreds of candles created an intimate glow, while strategic fairy lights twinkled like stars. The aisle was lined not with traditional flowers, but with easels, each holding a small painting depicting moments from their story: the storm, the accusations, the reunion in Paris, Luna's birth, the long journey of redemption. Music swelled, not the wedding march, but a specially composed piece that wove together classical romance with contemporary hope. Luna went first, scattering not rose petals, but tiny golden stars that caught the light like captured wishes. Then Marama began her walk, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Campbell stood at the end of the aisle, looking more vulnerable than he ever had in any boardroom. When he saw her, his careful composure cracked. Tears flowed freely down his cheeks as she approached, each step bringing them closer to their hard-won happiness. Their vows weren't traditional. How could they be, when their path had been anything but? "I choose you," Campbell said, voice rough with emotion. Not blindly, not with naive trust, but with eyes and heart wide open. "I choose you because I've seen both our darkness and our light, and I know that together we shine brighter than any storm can shadow." Marama's response came straight from her artist's soul. "I paint you into every dream, every hope, every moment of my future. You're the color in my world, the light that turns survival into living. I choose you not despite our scars, but because of how we've healed them together." Luna's part came next. They'd decided to make this not just a wedding, but a family ceremony. The little girl stepped forward, holding a small canvas she'd painted herself, 3 figures holding hands under a rainbow. "I choose us," she said clearly, just as they'd practiced, "forever and ever and ever." There wasn't a dry eye in the gallery as they exchanged rings. The bands were custom designed, carved with a continuous storm pattern that transformed into peaceful waves, symbolic of their journey from chaos to calm. The reception that followed was a celebration not just of their love, but of truth's triumph over lies, of trust rebuilt stronger than before. They'd invited the media not to hide from their story, but to own it completely. Let the world see what real love looked like. Battle-tested, scar-proud, unbreakable. Their first dance wasn't to a traditional love song, but to a piece Campbell had commissioned, blending the sound of rain and thunder with soaring strings and hopeful piano. As they moved together, their guests witnessed not just a dance, but a testimony to love's power to heal, to rebuild, to triumph. Later, as the celebration continued around them, they slipped away to Marama's studio. The setting sun painted the city in the same colors as that first stormy night, but now they stood together, stronger for every challenge they'd overcome. "Was it worth it?" Marama asked softly, her head on his shoulder. "All the fighting, the proving, the waiting." Campbell turned her to face him, thumbs brushing away happy tears. "Every second, every battle, every moment led us here, and I wouldn't change any of it." "Well," he smiled, "maybe I'd trust my heart sooner. And I'd trust your love faster." She reached up to trace his face, memorizing this moment. "But then it wouldn't be our story, would it?" "No," he agreed, pulling her closer, "and our story is perfect exactly as it is." Luna found them there, as she always did, completing their circle. They held their daughter between them, this precious proof of love's persistence, of hope's triumph, of family forged stronger through adversity. Outside, clouds gathered, not threatening this time, but promising future gardens, future growth, future joy. Inside, a family stood wrapped in love's warm certainty, ready to write the next chapters of their story together. They had weathered the storms, faced the accusations, fought the doubts, and emerged not just victorious but transformed. Their love story wasn't perfect. It was better than perfect. It was real. And as they rejoined their celebration, surrounded by those who had supported their journey, they knew that this wasn't really an ending at all. It was just the beginning of their greatest adventure yet. Because the greatest love stories don't end with triumph, they begin there. The end.